Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out my other socials for more. Enjoy. This is getting out of hand, Gabby. I can't keep up with all these orders anymore. Aunt Gabby peered over her glasses, a bemused smile playing at the corners of her mouth. That's why I called you, sweetie. I need your help. The nephew slouched in his chair, running a hand through his disheveled hair. I don't know the first thing about beauty products or running a business. How am I supposed to help? You're smart and you learn quickly. Plus, you need the work, don't you? Gabby's eyes twinkled with a mix of concern and mischief. Unless you've got better prospects lined up. A defeated shrug was the only response. Unemployment had been weighing heavily for months now, and the constant stream of rejection letters had taken their toll. Maybe this was the lifeline needed to stay afloat. Fine, but don't expect miracles. I'm not exactly your target demographic. Gabby clapped her hands together triumphantly. Wonderful. We'll start you off slow. Just help me package orders for now, and I'll teach you the ropes as we go. Days turned into weeks as cardboard boxes were filled, labeled, and shipped out to eager customers across the country. The nephew found himself oddly fascinated by the array of creams, serums, and powders that passed through his hands. Curiosity got the better of him one evening as he examined a small jar of moisturizer. What's so special about this stuff anyway? The question was directed at no one in particular as he unscrewed the cap and dabbed a small amount onto the back of his hand. The cool cream felt surprisingly pleasant as he rubbed it into his skin. Gabby's voice startled him from the doorway. That's our best-selling anti-aging formula. You've got good taste. Embarrassment flooded his cheeks as he tried to wipe away the evidence. I was just curious, that's all. Nothing wrong with taking care of your skin, honey. In fact, Gabby rummaged through a nearby box, pulling out several items. Why don't you take these home? Give them a try. It'll help you understand the products better when customers ask questions. Protest died on his lips as Gabby pressed the assortment of beauty products into his hands. Trust me, it'll make your job easier in the long run. That night, alone in his tiny apartment bathroom, he found himself staring at the array of bottles and jars spread out on the counter. Curiosity warred with embarrassment as he picked up each item, reading the labels and inhaling the subtle fragrances. This is ridiculous, he muttered, but his hands betrayed him as they reached for the cleanser. The cool foam felt refreshing against his skin, and he couldn't help but notice how much softer his face felt afterward. One product led to another, and before he knew it, he'd worked his way through the entire routine Gabby had put together. Looking in the mirror, he was surprised to see a subtle glow to his complexion. Maybe there's something to this after all. The next few weeks saw a gradual shift in his appearance and demeanor. The dark circles under his eyes faded, replaced by smooth, hydrated skin. His hair, once a tangled mess, now shone with health thanks to the nourishing shampoos and conditioners he'd started using. Gabby noticed the change immediately. Well, look at you, all fresh-faced and glowing. The products are working their magic, aren't they? He ducked his head, a shy smile playing at his lips. I guess so. They really do make a difference. Of course they do! That's why our customers keep coming back. Speaking of which, I need your help with something. Gabby explained that the influx of orders had led to an increase in customer service inquiries. I can't handle all the calls and emails anymore. Do you think you could take on some of that workload? Hesitation clouded his features. I don't know, Gabby. I'm not exactly an expert on women's beauty products. Nonsense. You've been using them yourself. Who better to answer questions than someone with first-hand experience? Gabby's enthusiasm was infectious. Tell you what, why don't you create an online persona, something that might make customers feel more comfortable? The idea took root, growing and blossoming over the next few days. He found himself drawn to the name Joe, ambiguous enough to work for any gender, but with a softness that felt right. As he settled into the role of Joe for customer interactions, something shifted. The first phone call was terrifying. His voice cracked as he answered. "Hello, this is Joe from Gabby's Beauty Boutique. How can I help you today?" But as the conversation progressed, a strange calm settled over him. The customer on the other end of the line had questions about which products would work best for her skin type. Drawing from his own experiences, he found himself easily recommending a personalized routine. "Thank you so much, Joe. You've been incredibly helpful. I can't wait to try these products." The call ended, and he sat back in his chair, a mixture of relief and excitement coursing through his veins. He'd done it. He'd successfully helped a customer as Joe. As days passed, Joe became more than just a persona. She became a refuge, a space where he could explore aspects of himself that had long been buried. The softness in his voice when speaking to customers felt natural, and the knowledge he'd gained about skincare and beauty routines flowed effortlessly. Gabby watched the transformation with a knowing smile. "You're really blossoming, aren't you? The customers love Joe." A blush crept across his cheeks. "It's different, but in a good way, I think. Different can be wonderful, sweetie. Embrace it." And embrace it he did. Joe took on a life of her own, not just in customer interactions, but in his personal life as well. He found himself gravitating towards softer fabrics, more fitted clothing. His movements became more graceful, his mannerisms more delicate. One afternoon, as he was updating the website's product descriptions, an email notification pinged. It was from a company called Fabulous, a women's clothing line interested in a potential collaboration. The representative, Ben, was eager to set up a video call to discuss the details. Panic set in as he realized the implications. How could he maintain the illusion of Joe on a video call? Gabby, ever the problem solver, had an idea. "Why don't we do a test run? I'll help you with makeup and we can see how convincing we can make you look on camera." Hours of YouTube tutorials and several failed attempts later, Joe stared back at him from the mirror. Subtle contouring softened his jawline, mascara opened up his eyes, and a soft pink lipstick completed the transformation. "Oh my," Gabby breathed. "You look beautiful, sweetie." The video call with Ben went better than he could have imagined. Joe came to life on screen, her knowledge of beauty products seamlessly blending with discussions of fashion trends and marketing strategies. Ben's enthusiasm was palpable. "This is fantastic, Joe. I think our companies would work incredibly well together. Would you be open to regular check-ins as we move forward with this collaboration?" "Of course." The words tumbled out before he could second-guess himself. "I'd love to work closely with you on this project." As the weeks passed, Joe and Ben's professional relationship deepened. Their video calls became longer, often veering into personal territory once business matters were settled. Ben's charm and wit drew Joe in, and she found herself looking forward to their conversations more and more. "You seem different lately," Gabby observed one afternoon. "Happier, somehow. Does this have anything to do with that handsome Ben from Fabulous?" Heat rushed to his cheeks. "It's not like that, Gabby. We're just colleagues." But even as the words left his mouth, he knew they weren't entirely true. There was a connection with Ben that went beyond professional courtesy. The way his heart raced when Ben's name appeared on his screen, the lingering glances during their video calls, it all pointed to something more. The realization hit him like a freight train. He was falling for Ben. But Ben didn't know the truth. Ben thought he was falling for Joe, a woman who didn't really exist. Guilt and confusion warred within him. How had things gotten so complicated? He'd only meant to help Gabby with her business, and now he was living a double life, caught between who he'd always thought he was and who he was becoming. Late one night, unable to sleep, he found himself staring at his reflection in the bathroom mirror. The face looking back at him was a blend of masculine and feminine features, a visual representation of the internal struggle he'd been facing. "Who am I?" The whispered question hung in the air, unanswered. The next morning, bleary-eyed from lack of sleep, he confided in Gabby. The words poured out in a jumbled mess. His confusion about his identity, his growing feelings for Ben, the guilt over the deception. Gabby listened patiently, her eyes filled with understanding and compassion. When he finally fell silent, she took his hands in hers. "Sweetie, I have watched you transform over these past months, not just on the outside, but on the inside, too. The person you are when you're Joe, that's not fake. That's a part of you that's always been there, waiting to be discovered." Tears welled up in his eyes. "But what about Ben? He thinks I'm someone I'm not. Ben sees the real you, the person you've become. The question is, are you ready to fully embrace that person?" The question lingered in his mind for days. He threw himself into work, trying to distract himself from the turmoil of his emotions. But every interaction with Ben only intensified his internal struggle. It was during one of their late-night video calls that everything came to a head. Ben had just finished telling a joke, and Jo found herself laughing uncontrollably. As the laughter subsided, their eyes met through the screen. "Jo." Ben's voice was soft, tender. "I think I'm falling in love with you." The world seemed to stop. Joy and panic collided in his chest. This was everything he'd wanted and everything he feared. "Ben, The words caught in his throat. "There's something I need to tell you." Taking a deep breath, he began to explain. The words tumbled out. How Jo had started as a persona for work, how he'd discovered parts of himself he'd never known existed, and how his feelings for Ben were real and true. As he spoke, he watched Ben's expression shift from confusion to shock to something unreadable. When he finally fell silent, the pause that followed felt eternal. I need some time to process this," Ben finally said, his voice strained. The screen went dark as Ben ended the call, leaving him alone with his racing thoughts and pounding heart. The days that followed were agony. Ben's silence was deafening, and he oscillated between hope and despair. Had he ruined everything? Was this the end of not just a potential relationship, but his entire new identity? It was Gabby who finally broke through his spiral of self-doubt. "Enough moping," she declared, marching into his room. "It's time to decide who you really want to be. Not for Ben, not for me, but for yourself." Her words struck a chord. Who did he want to be? The answer, he realized, had been there all along. The person he'd become as Jo wasn't a lie or a performance. It was the truest version of himself he'd ever known. With trembling fingers, he picked up his phone and dialed a number he'd been avoiding. "Hello, I'd like to schedule a consultation with a gender therapist." The journey that followed was not an easy one. Therapy sessions, difficult conversations with friends and family, and the slow process of transitioning all took their toll. But with each step, he felt more and more like his true self. Months passed without a word from Ben. He tried to move on, focusing on his transition and the continued success of Gabby's business. But late at night, when the world was quiet, he couldn't help but wonder what might have been. It was a crisp autumn day when the bell above the shop door chimed. He looked up from the display he was arranging, and his heart stopped. There, standing in the doorway, was Ben. "Hi." Ben's voice was soft, uncertain. "I hope it's okay that I'm here. I've been doing a lot of thinking." They talked for hours, pouring out their hearts and clearing the air. Ben explained his initial shock, his struggle to reconcile the person he'd fallen for with this new information. But ultimately, he realized that the essence of who Jo was, kind, funny, passionate, hadn't changed. "I fell in love with you," Ben said, taking his hand. "The real you. And if you'll have me, I'd like to see where this could go." Tears of joy streamed down his face as he nodded, unable to form words. It wasn't going to be easy, he knew. There would be challenges and obstacles to overcome. But for the first time in his life, he felt truly seen and accepted for who he was. Years later, as he stood in front of a mirror adjusting his wedding dress, he marveled at the journey that had brought him to this moment. The face that looked back at him was finally completely his own. Aunt Gabby appeared behind him, her eyes misty with happy tears. "Are you ready, Joe?" she asked, using the name that had once been a persona but was now his truth. Taking a deep breath, Joe nodded. "I've been ready my whole life." As she walked down the aisle towards Ben, towards her future, Joe silently thanked the twist of fate that had led her to discover her true self. What had started as a simple job helping her aunt had become the catalyst for a profound transformation, and now, surrounded by love and acceptance, she was finally home. The autumn breeze rustled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of new beginnings as Joe stepped out of the bridal suite. Her heart fluttered with a mixture of excitement and nerves, each step bringing her closer to the moment she'd dreamed of for so long. The soft fabric of her wedding dress whispered against the ground, a symphony of lace and satin that seemed to sing with every movement. She paused for a moment, catching her reflection in a nearby window. The woman staring back at her was a far cry from the confused, lost soul who had first stepped into Aunt Gabby's shop all those years ago. "You look absolutely radiant, sweetie." Gabby's voice came from behind, thick with emotion. "Ben won't know what hit him." Joe turned, enveloping her aunt in a tight embrace. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Gabby. You gave me the chance to find myself." Gabby pulled back, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "You did all the hard work, Joe. I just gave you a little nudge in the right direction." The sound of music drifting from the garden signaled it was time. Joe took a deep breath, steadying herself. "This is it," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. As they made their way to the entrance of the garden, Joe's mind wandered back to that fateful day when Ben had reappeared in her life. The months of silence had been agonizing, but the moment she saw him standing in the doorway of the shop, all the pain melted away. Their reunion hadn't been without its challenges. There were long conversations, tears shed, and moments of uncertainty. But through it all, their love had only grown stronger. Ben had stood by her side through every step of her transition, a constant source of support and understanding. The music swelled, and Joe felt Gabby squeeze her hand. "Ready?" With a nod, Joe took her first step down the aisle. The gathered friends and family turned to watch her approach, their faces beaming with joy and love. But Joe only had eyes for one person. Ben stood at the end of the aisle, looking dashing in his tailored suit. As their eyes met, the rest of the world seemed to fade away. The love and adoration radiating from Ben's gaze made Joe's heart soar. This was the man who had seen her true self, even when she was still discovering who that was. As she reached the altar, Ben extended his hand. "You look beautiful," he whispered, his voice filled with wonder. "Thank you for loving me," Joe replied, her eyes glistening with unshed tears of joy. The officiant began the ceremony, but Joe found it hard to focus on the words. Her mind kept drifting to the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the confused nephew helping out at his aunt's beauty shop to the confident woman she was today, every step had led her here. She thought of the first time she'd tried on makeup, the nervous excitement of her first video call as Joe, the heart-wrenching moment she'd revealed her truth to Ben. Each memory was a stepping stone, a crucial part of her path to self-discovery and love. "Do you, Joanna Marie Thompson, take Benjamin Alexander Cooper to be your lawfully wedded husband?" The question brought Joe back to the present. She looked into Ben's eyes, seeing all the love and promise of their future reflected there. "I do," she said, her voice strong and sure. As Ben repeated his own vows, Joe felt a sense of peace wash over her. This was right. This was where she was meant to be. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Ben leaned in, cupping Joe's face gently in his hands. As their lips met, the garden erupted in cheers and applause. But for Joe and Ben, it was as if they were the only two people in the world. The reception was a whirlwind of laughter, tears, and celebration. Jo found herself constantly surrounded by loved ones, each eager to share in her happiness. Aunt Gabby gave a touching speech, recounting how she'd watched Jo blossom into the woman she was always meant to be. As the night wore on, Jo and Ben swayed together on the dance floor, lost in their own little world. "I can't believe we're here," Jo murmured, her head resting on Ben's shoulder. "Sometimes I still feel like I'm going to wake up and find out this has all been a dream." Ben pulled back slightly, looking into her eyes.
"This is very real, Mrs. Cooper, and I plan on reminding you of that every day for the rest of our lives."
Jo's heart swelled with love. "I like the sound of that, Mr. Cooper." As the reception wound down, Jo found a quiet moment to slip away. She made her way to a secluded corner of the garden, taking in the twinkling lights and the scent of night-blooming flowers. She thought about the long road that had led her here, the confusion, the fear, the moments of doubt. They had all been worth it. For the first time in her life, she felt truly, completely herself. A gentle hand on her shoulder broke her reverie. She turned to find Ben smiling softly at her. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, wrapping an arm around her waist. Jo leaned into him, sighing contentedly. "I was just thinking about how lucky I am. Not just to have you, but to have found myself, to be living as my true self." Ben pressed a kiss to her temple. "I'm the lucky one. I get to spend the rest of my life with the most amazing woman I've ever known." As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms under the starry sky, Jo felt a sense of completeness she'd never known before. The journey to self-discovery had been long and often difficult, but standing here now, she knew she wouldn't change a thing. The beauty's products that had once been just a job had become the key to unlocking her true self. And now, with Ben by her side and a future full of possibilities ahead, Jo was ready to write the next chapter of her story, one of love, acceptance, and living authentically. As they made their way back to the reception, hand in hand, Jo caught sight of her reflection in a window. The woman looking back at her was radiant, confident, and above all, true to herself. She smiled, squeezing Ben's hand. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my other socials if you want more wonderful content, early access, behind the scenes, and more. All links down below.